Welcome back to Miss Lisa's biology class. You can like, share, subscribe. My goal is to get 1,000 subscribers so that I can do these videos on YouTube live. They won't let me because I don't have enough subscribers. But if I get enough, then I can go live and then I don't have to record it, then upload it. So it'll be faster. So everybody has to have goals, right? So what we're talking about, this class, if you find it on YouTube, this is designed primarily as a class for homeschoolers, but if you just like the way I explain things and you want to learn more about it, welcome, welcome, welcome. Well, I'm glad you're here. So what we're going to be talking about today is chapter 2 in our books that we're doing. We are doing this book, Biology and Everyday Experience. And what we're talking today about is cells. It's really just an introduction to cells. We'll learn more about these later when we get to the kingdoms. Then we're going to talk more in particular. So, introduction to cells. But before that, we're going to talk about what does it mean to be alive. So, you know, you've seen those Bailey buddies on the side of the road that, like a business, they have a fan and they go blow and then get flat again, blow and get flat again. One time it was at Halloween, and they have these now at Halloween, and I was leaving one of my friend's house and driving along, and suddenly one of those things was like at a field. It was at a farm. We live out in the country, and I was just driving by this farm in the dark, and suddenly this glow-in-the-dark thing goes, oh, and I almost drove off the road. I just screamed, ah! So I think their little thing had more of an effect than they ever dreamed. But is it alive? I mean, it moves. Is movement what makes something alive? I don't know. So look in your book and let's talk about if we can figure out if that Bailey Buddy thing is alive. That's from wrestling. There was a wrestler girl who used those things before she turned heel, and now she's a bad girl. So how do you know if something is alive? Number one, living things reproduce. Does that mean if you haven't reproduced yet, you are not living? No. It's just that they have the ability as a type of organism to reproduce. Not every organism will reproduce, but it has the ability to reproduce as that type of organism. Also, living things grow. So you were a baby, you got big, you're alive, you grew. Another one is living things develop. So you change. You're not the same as you are when you were a fetus. You know, now you don't eat through your belly button anymore. You now eat through your mouth. You have developed, you have changed, and you will continue to change throughout your life. The next one is that living things need food. So we have to take in energy of some sort. It could be a plant taking in sun energy and making its own food, or it could be us that eats the plant and that's where we get our food, or it could be an eagle that eats an animal that ate the food and that's what its food is. So all living things need some sort of food. So we know rocks are not alive because they don't need food. Living things also use energy. We take in food to use for energy. We burn it in some way and we turn that food into energy. Living things are made out of cells, and we're going to be talking more today about what is a cell, how do we discover cells, what is cell theory. But it is basically a building block of living things is what cells are. Also, living things respond. So like a plant can respond to light, an animal responds to a stimulus, excuse me. And also, living things are adapted to their environments. So living things are suited for the environment they live in. You know, coconut trees grow great in the tropics, not so good in Alaska. They are suited, they are adapted to their environment. So now let's talk about the chemistry of life. There are certain elements, and I should have a periodic table here. Let's look right here. Sorry, book's fallen over. Here's a periodic table. So, and on the periodic table, most of these elements from here over are metals. But up here in this corner, right here, are non-metals. And these are the elements that are the chemistry of life. I always say it's chnops. It's carbon, hydrogen, but there is, sometimes hydrogen is put right here in the middle, and sometimes it's put over here. So hydrogen, there's debate about where it should go on the periodic table. So it's carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur. Now your book adds calcium from over here, but usually what is said to be the elements of life is chnops. All right. Then we also need 33 other vitamins and minerals, trace elements for living too. You actually even need a tiny bit of arsenic. Isn't that weird? Arsenic is a poison. It will kill you. There was a movie about it called Arsenic and Old Lace, where old ladies were killing people with poison. I don't know if I've seen it. I think I tried and fell asleep, but it's a memory out there. But anyway, but you need just a itty bit for life, so it's kind of weird. And so some of those are like the vitamins you see on the vitamin aisle. They are, things like potassium, you need some of it. Magnesium, you need some. All right, so that is talked about in your book on page 30. And then it talks about cell theory. So a lot of times in science, technology and scientific advancement kind of go one goes up a little bit, which causes the other to go up, which causes the other to go up. And that really has to do a lot with biology. A long time ago, they were just starting to discover about lenses. And so they were making lenses where they could see far, far away, see the stars and all that. And they were learning to make lenses like glasses and stuff like that. Well, then they started using more lenses together and see what that does to light. And they were able to make a microscope. So if you look in your book, it talks about Robert Hooke looked in a microscope and he looked at thin slices of cork. And he saw these little boxes. And he said they looked like where monks stay, Catholic monks who sometimes the men will all live together and in these little bitty rooms. They don't have big rooms, they have little rooms, and they're all alike and they're like all in a row in the monastery. And he said these look like the little rooms the monks live in, and those were called a cell. So he named them cells. So cells were named after the bedroom of Catholic monks. That's interesting, right? And now we know he wasn't, and so that led to the development of cell theory. Later on, Robert Brown discovered that there were parts inside the cell once he was looking at living cells, and he discovered the nucleus, which is sort of like the brain of the cell. It sort of in charge. And then to German biologists Schleiden and Schwann, I'm sure I'm saying that with perfect German, they came up with cell theory that all living things are made out of cells. And that is in your book on page 31. And cell theory basically has three parts. All living things are made out of one or more cells. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function of living things. And all cells come from other cells. So is the whole life begets life thing. And of course, that always asks the controversial question, where did this first cell come from? If all cells must come from other cells, what about that first cell? So that's controversial. And if you think about it, you'll realize why. So anyway, that's cell theory. So originally when they were first looking at cells, they were only looking at what was a leftover cell wall. Plant cells have something extra that animal cells don't. It's this outer thick layer that's hard, and a lot of times after the cell dies, the thing around it will stay, and that's what actually happened with that cork. It's what crunches when you crunch celery. You hear that big crunch, or an apple. You're crunching those cell walls. So, and there's even other plants that leave behind their cell walls besides cork, and they have economic impact things. So next, let's talk about the cell. So the cell has different parts that you're going to learn so a lot of them today, but others we'll talk about when we get to the kingdoms. So I pulled out a picture of a cell so I could have another book so I could show it to you. I used to teach so long ago that we had overhead transparencies, and I was looking for an old transparency of this, and I think I finally threw them away. And now, of course, I need them again. They would be perfect to show y'all. But that's how it goes, isn't it? All right, so this is an animal cell, and this is a plant cell. And this is a prokaryotic cell, like a bacteria cell. Okay, so you can tell this is the plant cell because it's green. It's got chlorophyll in there. In the chloroplast is what holds the chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll is what takes sunlight and turns it into energy for the plant and for us because we eat plants. Then this is the animal cell. It doesn't have it. So what's on the outside is the nuclear membrane. This one calls it the plasma membrane. I think the nuclear membrane, the cell membrane. This one calls it the plasma membrane. I think your book just calls it the cell membrane, which I wrote on there, cell membrane. So it's sort of like the skin. Okay, the plant cell has outside of the membrane the cell wall, and also the bacteria has a cell wall. So what makes bacteria so hard to kill? They've got their little coating on them that makes them, that's a protective coating. It's like they have armor to get by our defenses. Okay, so then other things in the cell, the big round ball in the middle is the nucleus, and I already told you it's like the brain of the cell. And what it really does is it directs protein synthesis. So we have a nucleolus, which is like a little ball inside the nucleus that is used for that. And it has its own little skin over it, which is the nuclear membrane. So there's a membrane around the nucleus. Then there is these things called vacuoles. They're big or sometimes not so big little pouches inside the cell that they're for storage. Sometimes they store waste, sometimes they store water. And one type of something that stores is this thing called a lysosome, and that one causes the cell to break down when it dies. So it's sort of like the little suicide vacuole, because it will break down and release chemicals that help decay start. Okay, so there's something called a centriole, and that helps with reproduction. We're going to learn more about that when we talk about the reproduction of the cell. There's mitochondria. That is called the powerhouse of the cell. It helps with the cell's energy, making energy for the cell. And it is in the plant and the animal. In it, there is DNA. For the plant and animal cell, the DNA is in the nucleus. For the bacteria cell down here, the DNA is just loose. It's not organized. The bacteria also have flagella. They can swim around to attack you. They're good attackers. A lot of people get sick from bacteria. Let's see if there's something else I missed. A feature that the plant cell has that the animal does not is the chloroplast that contain the chlorophyll that takes sunlight and turn it into energy. Ribosomes. These are little dots in the jelly-like stuff on the inside. The jelly-like stuff on the inside is called the cytoplasma. And it is where most of the chemical reactions take place. And in it are these dots, ribosomes, and it is where proteins are synthesized. The instructions for the protein is in the nucleus. And we will learn more about how those instructions get out to the ribosomes where the proteins are actually synthesized. And that's what really controls life is proteins. So we'll learn more about that. There's other features we're not really going to talk about. There's something called the rough endoplasmic reticulum and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. There is something called a Golgi body or a Golgi apparatus. So there are a few more things in there, microtubules. The nucleus have pores, little holes in them where things can go in and out because there has to be something going in and out to get the information in the nucleus from the DNA to take it out to the ribosomes to make the protein. Okay, so you read that in your book, study it, and know that this is an introduction to it, and we're going to revisit those concepts as we go along, because once we get into the kingdoms, then we'll talk a little bit more about these ideas. All right, so I think I talked about all of that. Read it in your book, take a good look at it. You will be doing some labs this week. Go back and let's look at those. The first one is, do all living things give off carbon dioxide? And how you do it is you get a fish. And then you put the fish in the water. And then you are going to test the water for the presence of carbon dioxide. And I think you are going to be able to do that all with the stuff that I can tell you. So I'll put it in the homework. In the description, it will be the homework, and I think you can do it. We did it with my biology class last year. We went and got our fish, our guppy, from PetSmart, and they were supposed to be like 50 cents, and he gave it to us for free because he said somebody had messed up and that fish was probably going to die anyway. So, but we got 2 of them because I had 2 biology classes, and he gave us our fish for free. So either way, it's not very much, and we were able to test and show that that fish did give off carbon dioxide. So I should be able to modify the lab, and I'll put it in the comments where you can do it too. It's fun. And then there's another, and you can also, I think we do another one with the fish later too. And then there's the second lab has about cells. You're looking at plant cells and animal cells in the microscope. And if you don't have a microscope, you'll just look at them on the internet. But if you have one, it's a great opportunity for you to look at plant and animal slides and to start getting that microscope training that you want. So you'll do it either way, whether you use the internet or a microscope. All right, so this is a page out of a student's drawing sketchbook, and it's got some good things and some bad things I wanted to show you. First of all, notice that you don't have to draw the circle that you're looking through. You can just draw it. Notice you don't just scribble also. I want good detail of what you're seeing. I want multicolors. I want you to use your colored pencils, and I want you to label what you're seeing. Now, where this kid messed up is you also want to label your magnification. These should say on them, like if the lens, I should have brought my microscope, if the lens, the little pointy thing that you're looking through, says 10x on it, it means it's magnifying it 10 times. Well, the eyepiece also magnifies 10 times, the part you look in. So you do 10 times 10 is 100, and then you write 100x. If it says 40 on the little thing coming off the nose, then you would do 40 times 10 and you would write 400. So this student messed up by not putting his magnification. There was his hair. Remember, you were supposed to look at hair last week. So I think this was from his first lab. Yes, I also had them look at a piece of salt under the microscope. And he looked at some leaf veins. And he looked at a slide of a chick embryo. I had told them that they could get out some more slides and look at it because we were learning about the microscope. He does not have his backward upside down E drawn here that he should have done as part of that lab. But I found this and I thought, oh good, I'll show them how these are. All right, so back in your book again, there are some special cell processes I want to talk about. The first one is called diffusion. Now, there are 2 kinds of ways to get things inside the cell, and it is active or passive transport is what it's called. Active transport takes energy, and that it takes the cell's energy to go get the stuff and bring it inside. But there is also passive transport where things can just flow into the cell. And the reason why things will flow into the cell is because I always think of, there used to be this old show, and you can watch it. Y'all, you should go on YouTube and watch it because it's just great. It was called Beakman's World. It was back in the 90s or maybe even the 80s, I don't know. But there was this guy named Beakman, and he had really tall hair, and him and his lab rat, I can say that, Lester, that's what was throwing me off, is the Lester, would do experiments and explain things. And one time he's got like a big scale, like the scales of justice with the 2 pans on his back, and he's going around going like this and making the pans go like this, and he says, nature likes balance. And it's true that nature likes balance. So if you have a cell membrane and say there is more oxygen on one side of the cell membrane than the other one, then the oxygen will just flow until it's equal on both sides because nature likes balance. You're imagining the scales on my back and me doing that like Beakman. So, and even water. So like if there's less water concentration inside the cell than outside the cell, say there's more water concentration inside the cell than outside the cell, then the water, these very small molecules can just flow through the little holes in the cell membrane, and out it flows. And that with no energy, just based on the fact that nature likes balance. You have to do that every time. So that's called diffusion. If it's water, it's called osmosis. So kids will joke and they'll lay their head on their book and say, I'm going to take a nap and see if I learn by osmosis. No, they can't, because osmosis is only water. Diffusion, they're trying to learn by diffusion, and it will not work. You actually have to read the book and study it. So there you go. So you'll read about that in your book, and if you don't understand my explanation, read theirs, maybe it'll help. And then the last thing is how is life organized? And it's the smallest living thing is a cell. So if you look on your book on page 41, that the smallest organized part of life is the cell, and then it is tissues, and then it is organs, then it is organ systems like your digestive system, and then it's an organism, which is a living being, a living thing like you. Now, not all life has all of that. There are single-celled living organisms like amoebas. So keep that in mind. Also, there are things that are smaller than cells that really look like they're alive, but technically we say they're not alive because they don't follow this definition, and that's viruses. Viruses are really weird. We're going to talk about them later. They're kind of like robot invaders from outer space, but they're technically, they don't follow the criteria of life, even though they can move and they can reproduce. We'll talk more about that later. So read the chapter, do the labs, come back next week, and I'll write the rest of the homework in the description. And remember, science is great. See you next time.